Okay, let's unpack this idea. We've got this huge story, right? How societies developed, like in Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Yeah, that sweeping history.
And then you've got Charlie Munger's way of thinking about, well, about making smart decisions, pulling ideas from everywhere.
Right, the multidisciplinary approach. It seems like two totally different things at first glance.
Exactly. But what if they're connected? That's where things get really interesting, I think.
Well, it's fascinating when you look at Diamond's really macro view of history. You see these fundamental forces, and they echo in other complex systems, like investing.
That's Munger's whole thing, isn't it? Understanding those base principles by looking through lots of different lenses.
Precisely. He wants that lattice work of mental models.
So welcome everyone to this deep dive. We're tackling the big ideas in Guns, Germs, and Steel, but we're looking at it through the lens of Charlie Munger's thinking.
So the mission really is to pull out Diamond's key insights, geography, biology, history shaping civilizations.
And then see how those same deep forces might give value investors a framework. A better way to make rational decisions, maybe.
Kind of a shortcut, perhaps, to getting well informed about the really big drivers, the things that influence, well, almost everything, even markets.
Yeah. So Diamond's book, it basically tries to answer why history went so differently on different continents, right? That question from Yali.
Right. Why did some societies end up with so much more cargo, as he put it? And
Yeah.
crucially, Diamond hammers this home. It's not about race, not about inherent differences in people.
No, definitely not. He's digging down to those, initial environmental factors, advantages, disadvantages.
Yeah, the starting conditions.
And then Munger, he's always saying, to really get a handle on the world, you need that broad toolkit. Mental models from psychology, physics, history, biology.
So we're bringing these two big ways of seeing the world together today.
Okay, so how do we bridge that? Massive history, practical investing.
I think it's about recognizing the patterns, the fundamental principles that just keep showing up.
All right, let's get into it. Part 1. Diamond's foundational factors. First up is geography and environment. And this is way more than just, nice landscapes, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's fundamental. What's really striking is just how different the basic resources were. Plants, animals, ready for domestication.
Okay.
Eurasia, particularly the Fertile Crescent. I mean, they basically hit the jackpot. Think about the wild ancestors of wheat and barley.
The big ones.
Yeah. They were edible, high yield, easy to grow, quick to harvest, storable. They self-pollinated, didn't need massive genetic changes, plus that whole Mediterranean zone in Eurasia, just packed with diverse annuals, big seeded grasses.
Wow, so nature just dealt them a really strong hand.
A major advantage right from the start. Compare that to the Americas.
Yeah, I remember reading about the lack of big animals there.
Exactly. Almost no large mammals suitable for domestication. Many potential candidates actually went extinct maybe 13,000 years ago. Huge setback. And even plants were tougher. Corn, the big one in Mesoamerica. It came from teosinte, this wild grass that needed thousands of years of pretty major changes to become really productive.
A much harder path.
Yeah. And Australia, even more limited. Macadamia nuts are like the only native plant successfully domesticated, and that was modern science. Their native cereals just weren't as good green-wise.
So it wasn't about who was smarter or worked harder initially.
No, not at all. It was about the raw materials available, the cards they were dealt by nature. That creates this huge, long-lasting head start.
Okay, so the basic resources were unequal. And then the actual shape of the continents mattered too, how things spread.
Hugely. Eurasia's east-west axis, that was a massive advantage.
Why east-west?
Because climates and day lengths are similar across the same latitudes. So agriculture, technology, ideas, they could spread relatively easily horizontally across the continent.
Ah, okay. Easier diffusion.
Much easier. Contrast that with the Americas. North-south axis. Different climate zones, big geographical bottlenecks like Central America, Panama. It really slowed things down.
So innovations might happen in one place, but struggle to spread.
Exactly. Diamond points this out clearly. Domestic animals didn't spread easily between, say, Mesoamerica and the Andes or North America. Same for writing systems, complex political ideas.
Right.
Even basic crops like corn and beans moved much slower north-south than wheat spread east-west. And you had fertile places like California or Oregon that just never got agriculture before Europeans arrived because the right package of crops hadn't made it there.
Wow. Geography is destiny, almost.
Yeah.
And climate ties into that, too. Obviously.
Absolutely. What can grow where it's climate dependent? Think about tropical African crops they couldn't cross into South Africa's Mediterranean climate zone. That fish river was a real boundary.
Okay, so geography sets the stage in a huge way. The next piece is germs. Not a pleasant topic, but crucial.
Crucial and quite tragic, really.
Yeah.
Eurasia's long history, living cheek by jowl with domesticated animals.
Like cattle, pigs, chickens.
Right. That led to the evolution of all these crowd diseases. Measles, smallpox, flu. They often jumped from animals to humans.
Okay.
And the key thing is these diseases need large, dense populations to keep going, to sustain themselves.
Which you wouldn't really get in small nomadic growth.
Exactly. So the Americas, Australia, they lacked that long history with diverse domesticated animals. They simply didn't develop those specific crowd diseases.
So when Europeans arrived,
The consequences were absolutely devastating. Eurasian germs just ripped through populations with no prior exposure, no immunity. De Soto's expedition, finding empty towns in the southeastern U.S., probably diseases that spread ahead of the explorers themselves.
a terrible biological advantage. It makes you think about resilience.
It does, and maybe there's a parallel in investing, right? A
Mhm.
company without diversity, maybe a weak balance sheet. It's more vulnerable to market germs, sudden shocks, disruptive tech.
Like lacking an immune system.
Kind of. Munger would probably call it a lack of redundancy. That's a key principle in engineering and biology. You need backup systems, resilience.
Good point. Though Diamond does mention it wasn't all one way with diseases, right?
That's true and important. Tropical diseases, malaria, yellow fever in places like Africa, parts of Asia, they were huge barriers for Europeans for a long time, sometimes centuries. They even stalled things like the Panama Canal construction initially.
So germs played a complex role globally. Okay, geography, germs. Next. Technology. How does Diamond fit that in?
Well, he connects it back. Eurasia's longer history of agriculture meant denser populations sooner. That allows for specialization.
Ah, so not everyone has to farm.
Right. You get artisans, metal workers, eventually scribes, bureaucrats. This, plus more interaction between societies, just speeds up innovation. So you see metallurgy, complex tools, writing developing faster there compared to the Americas, where stone tools remain dominant in many places much longer.
And writing. That sounds like a game changer.
Oh, huge. Think about conquest and administration, sending orders, drawing maps, keeping records, sharing knowledge over distance and time. Oral tradition is powerful, but writing just adds this whole other layer of accuracy, detail, reach.
Yeah, I could see that.
And you see interesting things like blueprint copying one society adapts another script versus idea diffusion, where just the concept spreads, plus independent inventions like the alphabet. But even then, geography could limit spread, like getting writing across the Sahara or to the Andes.
So even with a great invention, it doesn't always take hold everywhere.
Right, like that Phaistos disc in Crete early writing, but didn't seem to spread widely then. So technology builds on the other factors. It's part of that cumulative process.
Okay. And the last big piece from Diamond is political organization, how societies structure themselves.
Again, it links back to food production. Surpluses from agriculture. That's what allows for specialists, but also supports chiefs, kings, states, larger organized groups.
Groups that can do more complex things.
Like organized large-scale sustained warfare. Hunter-gatherer bands typically can't do that in the same way. Diamond talks about this progression from egalitarian bands towards chiefdoms and states, sometimes what he calls kleptocracies, where the elite take a large share but ideally provide order or protection in return.
Kleptocracy. Sounds familiar even today sometimes.
Well, maybe. But the drivers for societies getting bigger were things like handling disputes, making decisions for the group, redistributing food or goods, and yeah, military power. Think of the Zulu state forming through conquest, or the Aztecs, the Incas.
Powerful examples. And did geography influence the type of political structure too?
It seems so. Europe's jagged coastline, mountains, it tended to foster lots of smaller competing states. Fragmentation. China, on the other hand, has this big, fertile core, river systems connecting it, that perhaps made unification easier, or at least more common over the long run.
Fascinating. Okay, so that's a whirlwind tour of Diamond's main arguments. Now, the really fun part, connecting this to investing through that Munger lens, feels like a leap, maybe?
Maybe, but I think the connections are there. Munger's core idea is using mental models from everywhere. And Diamond gives us these powerful models about how fundamental forces shape complex systems over long periods. That's gold for an investor, isn't it?
Okay, I'm with you. Let's try it. Geography first. How do continental advantages or barriers translate to markets?
Well, think about those continental advantages Diamond described. Early access to good resources. Isn't that like a company having a fundamental competitive advantage, like access to cheap raw materials, maybe a key patent, a strong distribution network?
Ah, like an economic moat.
Exactly. It's a kind of geographical advantage in the business landscape. And the barriers, Diamond talks about things slowing the spread of farming or tech. That sounds a lot like barriers to entry for competitors in an industry.
Right, like regulations or high switching costs for customers or just needing massive scale.
Yeah. A company with a super strong brand, or maybe locked-in network effects, they have a kind of defensible territory, a barrier that's hard for others to cross.
Okay, that parallel works. What about germs? Disruptive forces. How does that fit?
Well, think about germs in the market. What are they? Maybe disruptive technologies that come out of nowhere and just devastate old industries? Or huge, unforeseen global events, black swans that change everything?
Like the internet disrupting retail
Yeah.
or, well, the pandemic recently? Wow.
Exactly. COVID was a massive germ that hit the global economy. So understanding that these things can happen and looking for companies with resilience, adaptability, a strong immune system, you could say,
The strong balance sheet, maybe not too much debt, diversification.
all of that. Companies that are fragile, maybe too reliant on one thing, they're more susceptible when a market germ hits. It's that lack of redundancy again. Munger would hate that.
Okay, got it. And technology. That connection seems more direct, maybe.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Diamond's technological advancement is basically innovation and productivity growth in business terms. Those are the core drivers of long-term investment returns, right? So being invested in the right technological continent, meaning the innovative sectors, the companies leading the charge, that provides a huge advantage over time. Think tech stocks over the last couple of decades, or AI potentially now.
Right place, right time, technologically speaking.
Mhm.
Okay, and political organization. That seems a bit more macro.
It is, but it matters hugely for investors. Think about Diamond's stable versus unstable societies. That relates directly to good governance, national and corporate, and stable, predictable regulatory environments.
Things investors crave, basically.
Absolutely. You want to invest where there's rule of law, where contracts are enforced, where your investment is secure. Diamond's kleptocracies. Well, that sounds like corrupt regimes or poorly managed companies run for the benefit of insiders, not shareholders. Both destroy value.
So the quality of governance, whether it's a country or a company, is critical. A stable foundation.
It's fundamental for long-term prosperity and attracting capital.
This whole approach really forces you to take the long view, doesn't it? Like diamond looking over millennia.
Precisely. That's pure value investing, isn't it? Focus on the long-term trends, the enduring advantages, ignore the short-term noise. Those slow, powerful forces Diamond describes geography, tech development, they're like the slow compounding of value in the market. It takes time, but the effect is massive.
And it really drives home Munger's point about multidisciplinary thinking. You're not just looking at PE ratios.
No way. You're bringing in geography, biology, history, political science. Understanding resource constraints informs commodity plays. Understanding disease patterns informs healthcare investments. Understanding political stability informs country risk. It gives you a much richer, more robust picture.
Moving way beyond just the financials.
Right. Developing a more complete model of reality.
But you have to be careful too, right? Not to fall into simple determinism. Like Diamond avoiding racial explanations, investors shouldn't just grab onto one factor.
That's crucial. It's probabilistic thinking. Multiple factors interacting. History has wild cards, unexpected turns. Markets do too. You can understand the deep currents, but you can't predict the future precisely.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've journeyed through guns, germs, and steel, seen how these deep historical forces shaped civilizations.
And then we've tried to connect that to the investing mindset of Charlie Munger, using that broad, multidisciplinary lens.
And the big takeaway seems to be understanding these fundamental drivers, whether in history or markets, requires looking beyond the surface, thinking broadly, thinking long-term. A really valuable exercise for any thoughtful investor, I think.
Absolutely. Hopefully, this deep dive gives you, the listener, a feel for how powerful that wider perspective can be. Understanding these historical echoes might make you a more thoughtful, maybe more resilient investor.
So here's a final thought to chew on. How are those old continental advantages or disadvantages playing out today in our super-connected global economy? What are the modern equivalents of guns, germs, and steel when it comes to economic competition, market dominance?
Yeah, what gives nations or companies the edge now? Is it data, network effects, AI capabilities, access to specific talent pools?
Worth pondering, definitely. And of course, if this sparked your interest, dive into Diamond's book and explore the wisdom of Charlie Munger. There's so much more there.
You might find even more surprising connections.